My name is Mark. I'm 28 years old, and I'd lived in a small town in Ohio my whole life. For the past couple of years, I've been working night shifts at a 24-hour diner called Ellie's. It's a quiet place, mostly truckers, and the occasional insomniac looking for a cheap cup of coffee. Nothing crazy ever happens here. At least it didn't until last Tuesday night. It was a slow evening, like most. I was behind the counter, wiping down the same spot for the third time, when the bell above the door jingled. I glanced up, expecting one of our regulars, but it wasn't anyone I recognized. The man who walked in was tall and thin, with deep-set eyes and a nervous energy. His clothes were worn, too light for the chilly November night, and he carried a battered duffel bag. He slid into the booth farthest from the windows and sat there, staring at the menu like he couldn't read it. I walked over with my pad and pen. "Evenin', can I get you something to drink?" He looked up, and his gaze froze me for a second. His eyes were empty, cold in a way I couldn't explain. "Coffee," he said, his voice low and scratchy. I nodded and headed back to the counter. As I poured his coffee, I noticed he wasn't looking at the menu anymore. Instead, he was tapping his fingers on the table. Tap, tap, tap in a slow, rhythmic pattern. Something about it put me on edge. When I brought the coffee over, he didn't thank me, just stared out the window at the parking lot and woods beyond. The diner was dead silent except for the faint hum of the lights and his tapping. I tried to focus on wiping down the counter, but my eyes kept drifting back to him. He wasn't drinking the coffee. He wasn't moving much at all, just sitting there, tapping and staring. Around 2 a.m., a regular named Jim came in. He always ordered the same thing, eggs and bacon, extra crispy, and sat at the counter to chat. I welcomed the distraction and started his order, but out of the corner of my eye, I saw the stranger open his duffel bag. He pulled out a dark, crumpled shirt. My breath caught when I saw reddish stains on it, stains that looked an awful lot like dried blood. The man stared at the shirt for a moment, then stuffed it back into the bag. He zipped it up quickly, but not before glancing in my direction. Our eyes met for a second, and he smirked, a small, unsettling curve of his lips. "Everything all right, Mark?" Jim asked, pulling me back to reality. "Yeah," I lied, forcing a smile. "Just a weird night." Jim laughed, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling creeping over me. The stranger was now sitting perfectly still, his hands folded on the table like he was waiting for something. A few minutes later, I heard the sound of the duffel bag unzipping again. This time, he pulled out a small notebook. He opened it and started scribbling furiously, his pen scratching against the paper in a frantic rhythm. I tried to act like I wasn't watching, but curiosity got the better of me. As I walked past his booth to refill the napkin dispensers, I stole a glance at the notebook. It wasn't words. It was a list of numbers, rows and rows of them, some crossed out. At the top of the page, scrawled in jagged handwriting, were the words, "The Eliast." My stomach twisted. What kind of list was this? Was it names? Victims? I thought about the blood-stained shirt and felt my heart race. Did he know I'd seen it? I hurried back behind the counter, my hands trembling. Jim must have noticed because he asked, "You sure you're okay?" Before I could answer, the stranger stood up. He hadn't touched his coffee, but he threw a crumpled $5 bill on the table. Slinging the duffel bag over his shoulder, he walked toward the door. Just as he reached it, he stopped and turned back. His eyes met mine, and for a moment, it felt like he was looking straight through me. Then he walked out into the night. I didn't sleep that morning. I kept thinking about the notebook, the numbers, and the blood-stained shirt. Around noon, I called the sheriff and told him everything. He said he'd send someone to check the diner's security footage. 2 days later, I saw a news report about a body found in the woods near the diner. The victim hadn't been identified yet, but the estimated time of death made my blood run cold. Between midnight and 3 a.m., while the stranger had been sitting in my diner. I quit my job the next day. Some people say I overreacted, but I know what I saw. And I'll never forget the way that man looked at me before he left, like he was deciding whether or not to put me on the list.